Hey, good people. Talking analog and digital audio today for audio production, MDIA 2620. Lots of things to discuss, some foundational things that are going to build from, some of the real basic stuff that we learned in 1995. And then, this is sort of going to set the stage for everything that comes after. So this is really laying the foundation down for everything you're going to need to know in regards to audio production. So analog versus digital audio. Analog being the real world, the real sounds, and digital being, well, how are those things converted into something that we can record, digitize, and manipulate, right? So we're going to go and explore all those things and some specific things about analog sound, real world sounds, and some of the specifics about it, and then continue on from there. So what better way to begin than a weird old video from the 50s that still holds true today?
Sound is all around us, everywhere. It beats at our eardrums until much of the time we're hardly conscious of it. But on this particular Saturday morning, Jimmy Foster suddenly became very conscious of it, because a sound made him jump. Or was it really the sound that made him jump? It seemed as though the post was vibrating. Well, he'd soon find out whether there was a vibration along with the sound. The scrap of wood showed him that when the bell sounds, it does vibrate. Jimmy's ears were now wide open to the sounds around him. His eyes were open, too. Suddenly, he saw the steam from a whistle way over there, but didn't hear it until several seconds later. Jimmy became curious about sound and decided to look up his cousin, Phil Hansen. Phil is a radio ham, runs an amateur transmitter. He should know.
If sound is vibration, Phil, how does it get from one place to another?
Mostly through the air, Jimmy. You see, the vibration of my voice box makes the air vibrate between us. Then when the air vibrates your eardrum, you hear what I'm saying.
Vibration of voice box.
You can prove that air carries sound by... But maybe you've seen a demonstration of a bell under a glass jar? With normal air inside the jar, you could hear the bell clearly. But when the vacuum pump drew the air out of the jar, there was nothing inside to carry the vibrations of the bell. Nothing until the air was let back into the jar.
So you need air for sound to travel through?
You need something, but it doesn't have to be air. Here, I'll show you. We'll use a microphone, which is a sort of mechanical ear. Now, it picks up sound vibrations and changes them into electrical impulses. These go through the amplifier to the speaker, which changes them back into sound vibrations. Now, the sound of my voice travels to the microphone through air, doesn't it?
I guess so. Sure.
Well, sound actually travels better and faster through solid things. Iron or aluminum or glass. Here, hold the microphone over here. Now, what do you hear?
Nothing.
And neither does the microphone, or we'd hear it from the speaker. Now, I'll hold my watch up against the aquarium. You hold the microphone against your end.
Now I hear it.
That's because sound travels better through the glass than it does through air. Now, since the watch is waterproof...
I guess that proves that sound also travels better through water.
That's right. And speaking of water, it can also show us how sound travels.
All right, I won't subject you to the rest. That was enough. It's a cheesy video, but you get the idea there. The important stuff to know is that all analog sound, all real-world sound is created by vibrations of some kind. And that's where this idea of compression and rarefaction comes in. So compression and rarefaction, if you can sense it, it's a chain reaction of molecules pushing into each other. And then the rarefaction is when those molecules are being pulled apart again. So the easiest way to think about this is like you strike a bell. It causes a vibration. The molecules around the bell are pushed into each other and pulled apart as long as that vibration continues. And some materials, some things that create a sound vibrate differently than others. right? So that's going to determine what quality of sound that we have. But it's important to know that the basis of the vibrations causing the sound is this idea of compression and rarefaction. So pushing and pulling of the molecules around whatever it is that's vibrating and causing sound. Okay, that brings us to a super important aspect of audio that we're going to come back to again and again and again, and that's frequency. Okay, frequency is a measure of how often a wave cycles in 1 second. So a sound wave we've seen visually, like it's represented there in the picture. What's really being illustrated there is how many times a sound vibration occurs in 1 second. All right, so that's the measurement that we're dealing with, and you measure it in hertz. So a lot of times you'll hear 20 hertz or 20 kilohertz, meaning thousands of hertz. So that's just the measurement, so we can identify where on a spectrum a certain frequency of a sound might lie. All right, now this is a little bit trickier to sort of grasp, but if you can imagine that frequency is associated with pitch, then you would realize that higher pitched sounds have higher frequencies, right? So imagine again with the bell example. You've got two bells. One is a large church bell, and the other is like the little teeny butler ringing a dinner bell sort of thing, right? The larger sized bell is going to vibrate slower, have a lower frequency, because that sound wave is going to cycle through less often per second than the higher sound. You hit that little teeny dinner bell and it's going to vibrate, but it's likely not going to vibrate as long, and it's going to vibrate much, much faster with more frequency. So that's going to cause its pitch to be higher. And that goes for all sound, right? We can identify ranges of frequencies for particular sounds. For example, if you're interested in mixing music, it's going to be of great benefit to you to figure out and identify what instruments live in what frequency range, right? So a soprano vocalist is going to be in a higher frequency range than, say, the tuba player in the room. So it'll be important to understand sort of where in the frequency spectrum different sounds lie, and also to understand that certain sounds cover a range of frequencies, not just one very specific frequency. That's important to understand. All right, so from the words of science, human hearing range is 20 to 20,000 hertz. So you might hear it 20 to 20K. All right, so anything below 20 hertz is known as infrasonic, and anything above 20,000 hertz is known as ultrasonic. But generally speaking, the human hearing range is 20 to 20,000 hertz. So that's what, when we look at a frequency chart, that's what the range, that's what that graph is showing you, the space between 20 and 20,000 hertz, and then exactly where a particular sound might fit in that range. All right, so if you think of something ultrasonic, which is above 20,000 hertz, we're talking something like a dog whistle. That it's certainly making some sound, and other ears that exist can hear things, but not humans. Okay, what happens next is I'm going to play a short video. It lasts about 2 minutes, and it cycles through all of the frequencies in that spectrum. The idea is that you're going to listen, and I want you to make some observations. One, when you begin hearing any sound, and when you lose the sound as it filters through the frequency range, that's going to determine how, for lack of a better word, how good your hearing is right now, or how poorly you've treated your ears, I guess, when you find out when you lose the sound. And that's kind of interesting to see in itself. But also you might want to have control over the volume at this point, because it's interesting that as it goes through the frequency range, it kind of, the volume will raise and lower in waves as we go. But let's take a listen and just hear exactly what that frequency range of 20 to 20,000 hertz really sounds like. If we can get it going here. That's where I started hearing it, about 30. Now the signal frequency is going to exponentially move faster as we go, so it's not going to take as long as you think. Imagine we're only at 200 hertz or so, and we have to go to 20,000. I'm going to have to turn my volume down a little bit. Hang in there. Stay with it. It moves pretty fast from here. Anybody else getting the my brain is going to explode feeling? Please don't explode your brain. Almost there. And that's where I lose it. About 18.5 kilohertz is where I lose it. So I don't know, I'm 37 years old. I'm not sure where you lost it, but if you're doing any worse than that, then you got to be more respectful to your eardrums, I think. But crazy to sort of hear how that all works, isn't it? All right. So that's the human frequency range is 20 to 20,000 hertz. A couple more things. You're going to be hearing the terms of a frequency band. That is just a fancy word for a group of frequencies. And the easiest way to put this into perspective is to think of like your basic car stereo that has bass, middle, and treble, and you've got individual control over those sections of the frequency range. Those are frequency bands. And the more bands we have in that frequency range of 20 to 20,000, the more control we have over specific sections of frequency. So that's why we're able to, eventually we'll learn how to take advantage of these tools, we're able to manipulate recorded sound and reduce maybe certain frequencies that are irritating. We can tame those a little bit, and we can enhance the ones that we really like. So some interesting tools that are able to be used because of this. And we already discussed a little bit. Infrasonic sounds below the 20 hertz range, and then ultrasonic sounds above 20 kilohertz. Okay, and then sibilants. Those are specific words that have these exaggerated S sounds. You might have heard this with someone like, say, a news reporter reading the news on a news talk radio station or something, and there's like the S sound really sort of pierces through things. That's a very specific frequency that sort of is exaggerated a little too much based on some people's manner of speaking, really. So that's sort of an interesting little thing to throw in with frequency. This is a cool video just to show you what different strings on a guitar look like as you see frequency sort of moving in the physical world. It's pretty cool, right? got there is different strings of different width and size and stuff, and they're vibrating at different speeds and frequencies, which is what causes the differences in pitch. All right, but let's not spend all our time on frequency right now. There's other things to talk about, including loudness, which is measured in a different way, and we refer to it as amplitude. So that's the measurement of waveform loudness. All right, so how big those peaks are on that, if you're visually looking at a waveform, that's the amplitude of the waveform. We measure loudness in decibels, or dB. And it's important just to start differentiating between, what is it that we're actually calculating or measuring? Is it amplitude? Is it frequency? All sorts of different little measurement tools that we use, so it's important not to get those confused. But decibels is definitely associated with loudness. All right, and another super important aspect of sound that we're going to come back to again and again is the idea of dynamic range. So that's the difference between the loudest and softest parts of a sound. So if you can think of like a waveform that you would visualize in an editing program or something, there's a peak and a valley. So the difference between those two is the dynamic range, and that can affect a lot of things. And we could have a really long conversation about dynamic range, but dynamic range is important for various reasons, and we might want to be able to control it for various reasons. For example, in, say, musical genres, the latest pop song is probably going to have very little dynamic range, and it's going to be loud all the time. All right, that just gets people dancing and moving. It does some things physically to the body that you can't help but be interested in the music. But that wouldn't necessarily fit in, say, a different genre like classical orchestral music. Right? That kind of music is very dynamic. The difference between a piccolo solo and when the entire 100-person orchestra is playing is very dynamic. There's a huge difference between loud and soft. So there's circumstances where we want very little dynamic range. There's some circumstances like, say, a horror movie where we want incredibly large dynamic range so we can make that jump scare when, Michael Myers pops onto the screen and really pop. And it's important to know how we can control those things. So we're going to explore that further. But in regards to loudness, just understanding the concept of dynamic range right now is good enough. All right, a couple more things specifically about sound. Velocity is the speed of sound, and it can be affected by a couple of different things, including temperature and the conductivity of whatever the sound is traveling through, like in that first cheesy intro video about sound going through air versus water or glass or metal or something like that. And in addition, the speed of sound is scientifically proven as 343.2 meters per second. Not going to make you memorize it, but it's important at least to be presented with that information. And also just the idea that sound travels differently through whatever it's being conducted through. All right, so faster through water and 15 times faster through iron. Good to just know those things. And that the speed of sound is also affected by heat. So there's all these variables that are included in this. And you might be thinking, well, why does this stuff matter? Well, if you want to start doing live sound or do music sound for music performances or something like that, consider, have you ever been to like a big outdoor festival or something, and you could see things happening on stage way before you actually heard them back in the sound or back in the crowd? That has to do with all these different kind of things. And if you're running sound for something like that, you might determine that, and if the budget allows it, you might have a second sort of layer of speakers out further in the crowd, and you'd have to sort of figure out how to calculate how to make all this stuff work so it's synchronized. So it's important information to at least be aware of that these issues exist. So now we're going from analog sound, where we're talking about vibrations, compression, rarefaction, and some of the qualities of sound. And now we've got to turn that into the digital world. And we do that through a process called sampling. So the basis for converting sound into the digital domain, we need to take this real world vibrational related sound and turn it into something electrical that can be converted into ones and zeros that a computer can understand or that a recorder can record. All right, and a sample rate the number of samples per second of audio. So how quickly are we sampling things? The reason why I have the picture of the flip book right there is because that's how I picture sampling. Sampling is like taking a still photograph of audio. And the sample rate is how many of those still photographs are we taking per second. And the higher that rate is, the more detailed the sound is going to be. The more accurately it's going to represent the original, right? So if I had a sample rate of 2, I would only have 2 snapshots per second of what that sound really sounds like, and that wouldn't be very accurate at all. In fact, we're going to find out that the standard is much higher. But first,
In this video, we'll give you a quick...
There's a couple of professionals that talk about these things, and I think they put it into really good perspective, and they also provide some nice examples for it. So let's check it out.
In this video, we'll give you a quick overview on what we mean by sample rate, sometimes written FS. The basic concept you'll need to understand is the relationship between sample rate and the frequency content of an audio recording. Before we dive into the description of sample rate, let's listen to a few recordings made at different sample rates. Pay special attention to the changes in high-frequency content of each. As the sample rate decreases, the high-frequency information is less. First, a recording made at 44,100 samples per second, or 44.1 kilohertz, the standard rate used for delivering music to consumers. Next is the same recording made at 1/2 that rate, or 22.050 kilohertz. Last is the same recording made at 11.025 kilohertz.
Sounds like garbage, right?
So here's some background information on what's happening. In order to accurately record and reproduce a frequency, you need to be able to sample it at least twice every cycle. A 1000 Hertz signal takes 1/1000th of a second to complete a cycle. So if we wanted to make a recording of it, we would need to sample it at twice that speed. If we want to make recordings that include all frequencies up to the limit of human hearing, which is generally accepted to be 20,000 Hertz, we need to use a sample rate of at least 40,000 Hertz. Now, for technical reasons, we usually use a sample rate that's slightly higher than that. Most music applications use 44,100 Hertz. Your DAW offers a number of different sample rates, which can be used for a variety of reasons. 48 kHz is commonly used when producing audio for video because of the relationship between audio samples and the frame rate of the video. Some music producers favor sample rates that are higher than 44,100 or 48 kHz because of superior fidelity or advantages relating to sound design and signal processing quality. No matter what sample rate you choose, it's possible to convert your audio to a different sample rate using a sample rate conversion tool, albeit with some small change in audio quality. Ultimately, the choice of sample rate comes down to what works in your individual music production workflow.
All right, so that gives you some good information about sample rate, I think. Just to reinforce some of the most important things there, 44.1 kilohertz, the standard sample rate for CD quality audio. For streaming audio, same thing. So consumer grade, I guess this is what that should really say. Consumer grade audio, 44, you'll hear it as 44.1, but 44,100 hertz or 44.1 kilohertz, standard sample rate. Now that's not the standard sample rate for everything across the board. As you heard in the video, 48 kilohertz is the standard sample rate for video projects because it directly relates to the number of frames taken per second by your camera. And if you can think about it this way, again, the higher the sample rate, the more accurate your recordings are going to be, the more representative of the real world sound they're going to be. But if 44.1 is the standard sample rate for CD audio, and we're basically doubling the frequency in order to do that. If humans can't hear beyond 20,000 hertz, then recording anything above 40 with a sample rate above 40,000, things should be impossible to notice the difference, right? Human hearing should not be able to tell, but there's definitely arguments still to be had that larger sample rates are definitely superior, and that's a debate that can be argued for a long time. I think probably the biggest thing that you need to understand is what the consumer standard is, 44.1, but also that the higher the sample rate, the more accurate it's going to be. But the drawback to that is the larger the file size is going to be too. So luckily we're at a day and age where hard drive space is cheap, but the higher the sample rate, the more CPU heavy those audio sessions are going to be. All right, moving on from sample rate to bit depth. It's another sort of concept about the digitizing of audio that's important to understand. And bit depth is simply how many bits per sample. So based on your sample rate, how many bits are there going to be? And that allows you to determine dynamic range. The more bits, the more dynamic range you're able to utilize. The more control you have over dynamic range, and the easier controlling it is going to be. We might use lower sample rates and lower bit depths and things like that for streaming audio from a website to reduce buffering time and stuff like that. But we've gotten to a point, again, where technology and the speed of Wi-Fi and stuff has caught up where we don't really have to worry about this stuff too much, but it's important to understand sort of the difference. And I've got this silly picture of the different Marios over there. It's not quite 8-bit Mario versus GameCube Mario there or whatever is not quite the same, but you get the idea. It's more accuracy, right, based on more detail. And the bit depth, the lower the bit depth, you're increasing noise. And noise is not necessarily fuzziness, although that always winds up to be the case very frequently. But it's really just external stuff that you didn't want to be there. So one more video about that.
In this video, we'll give you a quick overview on the meaning and importance of the number of bits in a digital audio recording. The basic concept you'll need to understand is the relationship between the number of bits and the dynamic range of a recording. The term dynamic range means the difference between the loudest signal you can record without distorting and the quietest signal you can record before the audio falls beneath the noise floor. The number of bits corresponds directly to the dynamic range available in your recording. Let's listen to a few examples made at different bit depths. Pay special attention to the change in the amount of audible noise as we go through each. You'll notice that the fewer the bits, the more noise you get. First, a recording made with 16 bits per sample.
Only time will tell our story. Try to hold it as it slips away. Take your half-forgotten glory. Save it for us.
Now, a recording made with 8 bits.
You hear that fuzziness and stuff?
Only time will tell our story. Try to hold it as it slips away. Take your half.
And now, using only 4 bits.
Oh no.
At a resolution of 4 bits, the noise actually covers up some of the music in the quiet sections. It's generally recommended that you use at least 24 bits in your recordings. Now, most music distribution formats use 16 bits or fewer, and that's fine for your audience. But when you're working as a music producer, sometimes you'll want to do things to a track like turn it up, turn it down, use a limiter, compress it, which might bring the noise floor up. So it's nice to have a little extra dynamic range so that in the final product, we haven't raised the noise floor to the point where we can hear it.
All right, and so there's the idea of bit depth, and I think what's super important to take away from that is that the higher the bit depth, the more control and ability you'll have to play with dynamic range, and the less noise you're going to introduce. Because a lot of times, what happens when you're recording music, especially, is that you don't want to record at so high a level that you're running into distortion, that anything going through the microphone sounds too hot and it's kind of crunchy like that. So you want to be able to give yourself some headroom. But after you do that, after the performance is captured, you might want to maximize the volume level. And you can do that better if you had started out with a larger bit depth like that. So that's the basics of this stuff, going from analog to digital audio. You know, everything from the real world sound, vibrations and compression and rarefaction, to, you know, understanding sound itself, frequency and loudness, speed of sound velocity, and then, you know, how we digitize things. So that's the foundational stuff you'll need to know. Thanks. If you have any questions about, you know, the stuff covered in here, feel free to reach out to me, of course. And there'll be, you know, plenty more of these type lectures to come. So thanks for being with me today, and I'll see you next time.